If you watch my NBA 2K18 review for the Nintendo Switch, you would know that I glossed over the fact that the game required a micro SD card in order just to play the game. And if you didn't catch that video, that probably means you're not subscribed, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But anyways, a lot of people were kind of upset the fact that I did that. I actually had someone unsubscribe because I did that. So I thought to myself, maybe that wasn't really fair. Now, if you've been around YouTube the past couple days and various video game YouTube channels, you would see there's doom and gloom all about the Nintendo Switch and the storage situation. Some of my friends like Review Tech USA and Rerez have taken a pretty harsh standpoint on this, saying, you know, Nintendo pretty much screwed the pooch on this. They're really causing big problems. This could end up becoming bigger problems in the future. And I'm sort of not in complete agreement with that. I really wanted to research this topic a bit more before I decided to speak about it, but I've seen enough videos on it, I've seen enough different people's opinions, and I just wanted to give my opinion on the situation. So I've researched some stuff, looked into some stuff, and we're gonna look at both sides of the coin. We're gonna look at the positive and the negative, see what we can find out, and see if this really does create a detriment to the Nintendo Switch and its future, or if it's just the latest, you know, buzzword in the world of gaming. So, is the storage situation going to kill the Nintendo Switch off too early? Let's find out. Before we get into opinions on the subject, let's look at some facts on the subject. Now, the Nintendo Switch uses these different sort of cartridge cards that it stores all the game on. So these cards are available in different file sizes. There's a 1 gig, a 2 gig, a 4 gig, an 8 gig, a 16 gig, and a 32 gig cartridge available. And obviously, the more cartridge space you use, the higher the cost of the actual cartridges. So a 1 gigabyte cartridge is going to be a lot cheaper than a 32 gigabyte cartridge. Now, they are working on a 64 gigabyte cartridge as well, but at the time of this filming, that is not available. Now, we also have to look at the Nintendo Switch itself. This is not a traditional home console. This is not a traditional portable console. This is an interesting hybrid console, the first of which we have seen. And because of this, because of the ability to take it anywhere with you, you have to use a storage medium that really isn't disc-based, because you're just going to run into problems with things like battery life, and of course the fact that if you're moving it around a lot, that's going to mess with, you know, a disc. So you can't just put a Blu-ray disc into this. You can't use, you know, dated technology as far as a portable system is concerned. So I think Nintendo went with the right decision to make this sort of thing. Now, as far as memory expansion goes, you can get a 256 gigabyte cart for around $80 to $90 right now, less if they're on sale. And that is a way to get extra storage because the Nintendo Switch only has 32 gigs of storage. And that's sort of where this problem is arising with games, because you're starting to see games that are hitting that threshold already within the first year of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle. Now, Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2 was a game that was announced for the Nintendo Switch and released in Japan that was too big to go on the Nintendo Switch. You needed an SD card, but that was only released in Japan. The first, you know, instance of it in North America is, of course, NBA 2K18. And I picked up a micro SD card along with my copy of NBA 2K18 because I wanted to have a micro SD card. Yes, I did need it in order to play the game. Yes, that does suck, but it was what I needed for the future as well. Now let's look at a couple things before we get really deep into the topic. The first thing I want to mention is this isn't the first time that this has happened with the Nintendo platform. Bayonetta was actually released in Bayonetta 1 and 2, and if you wanted to download the full game on the Nintendo eShop, it was over 32 gigs. Which means that it would not fit on the Wii U's standard memory. So this has happened before, and it seems like we shall overcome, and you know, it ended up being okay, but I guess this is a little bit different because you do need to have something downloaded onto an SD card. You can't just buy a physical version, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, something else worth mentioning is, yes, it only has 32 gigs of memory built into the Nintendo Switch. Yes, that is not a lot, but obviously this was done to keep costs down. I mean, let's face it, Nintendo didn't know if the Nintendo Switch was going to be a success. Third parties didn't know that the Switch was going to be a success, but it has ended up becoming a success. So because of this, maybe it was a bit downplayed, maybe it was a bit underestimated, maybe Nintendo didn't expect all of these third-party games to come to the system. Speaking of third-party games, I wanted to look at a couple different games that were released both for the PS4 and the Nintendo Switch, compare their file sizes, and look and see what could have been done potentially. Now, a game like Troll and I, which, terrible game, but Troll and I was about 11 gigs on the PS4, it was about 7 gigs on the Nintendo Switch, so there's a 4 gigabyte difference between those two versions. Lego City Undercover, same sort of thing, there was about a 4 to 5 gig difference. Now when you look at NBA 2K18, the PS4 version of that game was about 47 gigs, and the Nintendo Switch version was about 22 gigs. Now I know you're sitting to yourself, thinking to yourself, well, if the game is only 22 gigs, why can it not just go on the standard, 32 gig memory? That should be able to hold it. Of course, some of that 32 gig is used for the operating system and various other things, but if it's only 22 gigs, it should be able to hold it. The problem is within the save file of the game. The save file for NBA 2K18 is over 5 gigs big. Now to put that into sort of perspective for you, a game like Pokken Tournament is about 3.4 gigs. The entire game of Pokken Tournament DX. Super Mario Odyssey, which is obviously going to be one of the biggest Nintendo adventures, is only 5.7 gigs. Breath of the Wild, which is a huge open world adventure, about 13.6 gigs. But a save file, a simple save file for NBA 2K18 was 5 gigs. And that's where the problem ended up happening. And there's different ways that 2K could have went about this, because when you look at a game like Doom, which is coming out on the Nintendo Switch, hopefully, in December is what they're pretty much aiming for from what I've heard. Doom is very interesting because what Bethesda and id Software is doing is they are doing the single player solely on the cartridge, the multiplayer available via download. So that way, no matter what, if you want to play this game 20 years from now and you have a cartridge and a Nintendo Switch, you can at least play the single player aspect, because let's face it, the multiplayer aspect is not going to be online anyways. These servers shut down way before 20 years, so they're at least preserving the single player aspect. I think some of the blame needs to go onto 2K for just how they put this game on the Switch. They could have easily done the single player aspect, modes that don't require online stuff, such as, Quick Game and, My GM and stuff like that, on the actual cartridge, so that way the online aspects were part of the digital download. So that way, if you wanted to play the online stuff, you could download the online stuff onto your micro SD card. Now, I'm not giving Nintendo a pass on this, because 32 gigs is admittedly way too small. There are obviously ways around this, and there are obviously ways that they can improve upon this by simply including some SD memory cards with the system. That's the beauty about SD memory cards. This isn't a proprietary thing like what the Vita had and the PSP had, where you had to buy the Sony branded product. Nintendo could easily double or triple the memory at a fraction of the cost now that the system is selling well. Another thing to consider is the fact that NBA 2K18 only used a standard 16 gig cart. They did not splurge for the 32 gig cart because that costs more. And I do understand that. I'm going to give 2K a pass on that. Why would they not want to use the more expensive cart? Well, in order to use the more expensive cart, obviously there's, certain minimum orders and stuff like that. The physical cartridge is not coming out until October. I still think the game will sell well because it's a game that I've really been enjoying. But when you factor in the fact that it's going to cost them more because the 32 gig cart costs them more, they would either have to eat the loss or charge more for the Nintendo Switch version. I don't think that's really palatable for the first year of the Nintendo Switch. That really doesn't make sense to do because the Nintendo Switch was sort of a question mark. NBA 2K18 has obviously been in development for a very long time for this console. It was one of the first games that was shown off for the console. So because of that, I'm sure 2K is just wanting to get their feet wet. And something else to consider is the fact that as time goes on and as more and more of these cartridges are made, the costs are clearly going to come down. Like I said, Nintendo is working on a 64-bit cartridge, I believe, or 64 gig cartridge as well. So you're going to have 16, 32, and 64 gig cartridges eventually. And probably in a year's time, this will be a non-issue because these cards will be so inexpensive. There will be so many Nintendo Switch systems out there that it'll be worth it. And if you need to expand your memory, go ahead and buy an SD card. I recently just got an Xbox One from a fan, which I'm so grateful for. Thank you, Acronel. And I've put about 3 games on there with a 500 gig hard drive. And guess what? That hard drive's filled up. So you have the benefit with the Nintendo Switch of not having to install your games onto the system. They can play off of the actual cartridge. If these big third-party games are going to continue to come to the system. The best way to do it is to separate the single and the multiplayer aspect. If you don't want to afford the more expensive cartridges, if you don't want to optimize the game to where, you know, a Nintendo level where you could fit, you know, Super Mario Odyssey in the size of a save file, I understand that. Things like optimization for file sizes definitely takes a lot of time. Then at least separate the single and the multiplayer aspect. I think this is something that has been definitely blown out of proportion. I don't see this being a huge issue in the future because, like I said, the prices are going to come down both on the SD memory and on the actual cartridges themselves. Companies are going to take more time to optimize things. This is the first year. You know, usually first year games are pretty buggy to begin with. They're not well optimized. They're just trying to get a game onto the system to see how the games perform, sort of a litmus test for the system. So as far as Review Tech USA and what Rerez said, they do have some good points. I just think it's a bit too much doom and gloom for me. I don't foresee this being an issue in the future as the prices of all these things come down. SD cards, micro SD cards are not that expensive. And I think, you know, a game like Skyrim is going to be very interesting to me because that's a published Nintendo game. And I'm sure the whole game will be on a cartridge, but will it be a 32 gig cartridge or will it be a, you know, a 16 gig cartridge? That's going to be a really interesting game to look out for. But like I said, I don't really think it's that big of a damning deal. I can definitely see both sides of the coin, but to me, I'll just buy a micro SD card and be done with it. Let me know what you think of this whole situation in the comment section down below. I'm sure this video will get some dislikes because there's a lot of people that think this is the end of the world, even though it's just video games. Let me know what you think. Make sure you hit that like button. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time. Later.
RGT 85. RGT 85. RGT 85.